For generations, this river has carried more than water. It's carried people, movement, and the quiet imprint of everything it touches along the way. Long before roads or borders, it served as a lifeline, connecting communities through travel, trade, and survival. The people who lived along its banks understood it not as something separate from their lives, but as something they moved with and depended on. They called it the Muddy River, a name shaped not only by the color of the water, but by what it carried: sediment, memory, and the constant motion of a living system. Today, the Susquehanna River stretches more than 400 miles, flowing through forests, farmland, and cities before emptying into the Chesapeake Bay. It's one of the oldest river systems in the world, older than the mountains it cuts through, continuing a path that has existed for hundreds of millions of years. And still, it moves.
The Susquehanna to us means every drop of water that runs into the Susquehanna. It's the entire watershed. So really, it's getting people to think more in terms of watersheds than it is in terms of individual bodies of water, because really they are all connected, and the Susquehanna isn't its own thing. It flows into the Chesapeake Bay, and the bay goes into the ocean, and it's all part of the same system. And so just that tiny little stream that runs through, a suburban neighborhood that doesn't even have a name to it is going to still flow downhill into a larger stream, and that one's going to flow into a bigger one, and that one will flow into the Susquehanna, which eventually goes to the bay, which eventually goes to the ocean. It really is vitally important to care about these really small bodies of water, because they are what makes the big ones. I mean, it really is like your grandfather telling you that if you take care of the pennies, then the dollars take care of themselves. Like, it's the same deal. You really need to take care of these small bodies of water because they create the big ones. People are often perplexed as to how did this stuff get here? We're on an island in the middle of the river that's really only accessible by boat. How are all of these Gatorade bottles and flip-flops and dead lighters, who's leaving this stuff here? Nobody left it here. Nobody even probably dumped it into the Susquehanna. It was in somebody's backyard, and it rained down a drain, and then a stormwater drain flowed into, it all kind of connects like that. And so I just think a misconception is that these small bodies of water are actually treated, or they're cleaned up before they make it to the larger bodies of water, and that's just unfortunately not the case most of the time.
And yet, the story of this river is not only about what it carries, it's also about how people respond to it. Across the watershed, communities and organizations are working to understand, protect, and restore what flows through it, recognizing that even small actions can influence something much larger.
Really, everything that's entering these tributaries is going to end up directly into the river and ultimately into the Chesapeake Bay. So, all that sediment, that bacterial pollution from fertilizers, that's all entering the creek. It then flows into the river, and then eventually flows into the Chesapeake in a matter of days. A lot of people, I think it might take a while. It certainly depends on how much rain we've gotten, and the dams definitely do impact the flow of the river, but ultimately everything that's entering these tributaries is going to eventually end up in the bay. Everything that's carried in the water, whether it's bacteria, chemicals, is eventually taken into the bay, impacting its health. You're really kind of impacted by the dams because of how it impacts the flow of the river. It's going to slow it down, it's going to impact the flow regime. It's fundamentally changed a lot of the things about the river as it exists now. Also, too, it definitely impacts local wildlife like fish and eels. They're going upstream to try and spawn in a lot of those tributaries, and it impedes their ability to do so. It's really created these large lakes on the river that wouldn't have existed prior to the dams being built. But we need energy to live the lifestyle that we have now, and for right or wrong, they exist, so it's how do we manage the necessity for energy, but also compromise with, having a healthy river and a healthy ecosystem and a healthy Chesapeake Bay.
Protecting a river system this large can feel overwhelming, but much of that work begins with ordinary people paying attention to the places around them.
Really, without volunteers, we couldn't accomplish our mission. They're the lifeblood of a small organization like ours. They do a lot of great work, specifically relating to, the advocacy and what we do to protect these waterways. They're kind of like our eyes and ears. Just recently, when there was a fire at J&K Salvage, one of the local residents saw the pollution that was entering the creek, and he called our Riverkeeper, Ted, to let him know what was going on. Ted was able to get down there and then call the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection so they could respond to what was going on. And if that person think to call, who's to say how long it would have taken for the state to come down and really take meaningful action to mitigate what was going on. It could have been, days before they got down there. And at that point, so much of what had already entered the creek would have been at the Chesapeake Bay already. So things like that allow us to do a better job at what we're trying to do. It really all is interconnected. What's happening in a stream in your backyard is going to eventually flow into the river and eventually enter the bay. It's a public health concern because the river and the bay are a source of fresh water for residents. These waterways are sources of recreation, of tourism. They support industries that create a lot of jobs in local communities. So they have a huge impact on us locally, even if it's not like in your own backyard specifically. There tends to be this mindset of like, well, what can I do? How can I make a meaningful impact? I think it's easy to become jaded and to really think that there isn't much that you can do, but really the small actions matter, whether it's just picking up trash or planting trees, it creates a domino effect. But more than anything, I think that awareness is the biggest thing. That's what I would say is the most meaningful thing. Awareness matters.
Awareness begins with connection, and often that connection starts much closer to home than we realize.
It's really because these are the ones that we're most closely connected to, like the little stream in your backyard or in your neighborhood, or the one that's closest to you that you can think of, or a little creek that you splashed in as a kid. That's your body of water. That's the one that you've formed a connection to, and that's really important. I think that if we as environmental advocates just talk about saving the bay, a lot of people here maybe never even been to the bay. Not everybody goes down there for a trip, so if you don't have any connection to it, why would you care? What matters is the water right there where you're at. I think that is a message that needs to be sent to people, that the water around them matters a great deal. Water has been a source of inspiration for people throughout human history, and it doesn't have to be a huge river to be inspiring. It is amazingly easy to form a close relationship with a river or a body of water. You don't have to be a boater, you don't have to be a fisherman, you don't have to be particularly outdoorsy. Like, it's enough to just walk along. It's enough to just sit down and observe for a few minutes. There is just something as natural as it can be about a human being connecting with water. And I just would encourage people to try to figure out where your body of water is that you connect to. It doesn't have to be just one, and it doesn't have to be big. It really can just be that tiny little stream that runs through your neighborhood that doesn't even have a name.
The Susquehanna has always been in motion. For hundreds of millions of years, it has carved its way through the landscape, connecting places, shaping ecosystems, and carrying the story of everything along its path. That story continues today, not just in the river itself, but in the choices made far beyond its banks, in fields, in neighborhoods, in the places where water first begins to move. Because every drop that enters this system becomes part of something larger, and as it flows downstream, it carries more than water. It carries the imprint of the world around it. What it becomes depends on how far the muddy river reaches and everything it gathers along the way.